You again? Judge Ronald Whitaker scoffed, glancing up from his bench as if the woman in front of him were a stubborn stain on an otherwise spotless robe. The black woman didn't flinch, didn't blink. She stood still, quiet, as if daring him to look closerly look. It was a humid July morning in downtown Chicago, the kind that made the courthouse hallways smell like sweat, paperwork, and the stale leftovers of justice gone cold. Courtroom 204 buzzed as it always did, people shuffling in worn sneakers or designer shoes depending on fate and color, the tired voices of clerks calling names like orders from a broken fast food speaker, and the gavel of Judge Whitaker, a man both feared and whispered about in bar associations for his covert consistency. The woman's name, according to the file before him, was Shonda M. Hayes, 33, charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. Her face was sharp, angular, too proud to be invisible, too composed to be poor. She wore a faded gray hoodie, jeans with a rip at the knee, and boots scuffed from the city's concrete. No lawyer stood beside her. She had wave counsel. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "You're representing yourself?" "Yes, Your Honor," she said clearly, every syllable crisp, measured. He chuckled, the kind that curdled. "You people love your courtroom theatrics. Let me guess you watched a few episodes of Law and Order and decided you could outwit the system." She said nothing. He leaned forward. "Ms. Hayes, you are accused of interfering in a federal drug raid, refusing to comply with police orders, and giving false information. Do you deny this?" "I do not deny my actions," she said, her voice steady. "But I dispute your understanding of them." Snickers from the gallery. Whitaker's nostrils flared. He flipped the file closed. "Save the poetry for the jailhouse. I've heard enough of these righteous rebel stories. You're not Harriet Tubman. You're a woman who thought she could outsmart the law, and now you're standing alone in front of me begging for mercy." "I'm not here for mercy," she said. For a brief second, Whitaker paused, then scoffed. "You'll get 10 months minimum, maybe more. I don't have time for." "Request to cross-examine the arresting officer," she interrupted. Whitaker blinked. "Excuse me? The officer's testimony is flawed. I have evidence that contradicts his affidavit." Now the courtroom murmured. She wasn't loud. She wasn't even theatrical. But there was something in her Tonia lawyer's cadence, a fighter's pause, a scholar's economy of words. "Denied," Whitaker snapped. "You are not licensed to cross-examine, but I have the right to question the evidence against me. Not here, not today, not without representation." "Then let's proceed to trial." "Trial?" He laughed outright now. "This is a bench sentencing. You pled no contest." "I withdrew my plea. Motion filed this morning." His head whipped toward the clerk, who confirmed it with a nod. "She submitted a motion at 7:48 a.m. It's valid." He stared at her. The courtroom had gone quiet now. Even the stenographer stopped typing. "You're playing a very stupid game, Ms. Hayes," he said slowly. "You think making a mockery of this courtroom will make you a martyr? I think exposing the truth makes me a citizen. You think you're clever. Just another angry mouth with a thesaurus." "No, sir," she said. "Just another black woman with a law degree and a memory." Something in Whitaker's face flickered, then hardened. "Fine. Trial begins now. Prosecution, call your first witness." But the prosecutor, a young white man in an ill-fitting suit, stood frozen. "Your Honor, I had just received this file this morning. I'm not prepared to argue." Whitaker glared. "Then get prepared. This isn't recess." Shonda's eyes scanned the room. Her gaze fell on a bailiff, then a stenographer, then back to the bench. "Then allow me to call my first witness. Officer James R. Halverson." "The arresting officer?" Whitaker said, almost amused. "Very well. Officer Halverson, a burly man with a shaved head and tattoos peeking under his collar, swaggered to the stand. He raised a hand, swore in, and sat with a casual smirk. "Tell the court what happened on June 3rd, Shonda asked. He spoke confidently. "We were executing a federal warrant. Suspect fled. This woman refused to clear the scene. Interfered. Shouted at officers. Tried to pull one away from the door. She wouldn't show ID. Lied about her name. Classic obstruction. Did I touch you? No. Did I threaten anyone? No. Did I record the raid? He shifted. Not that I know of. I did, she said. Exhibit A. She held up her phone. A copy had already been sent to the clerk and played on the screen. The video showed a chaotic scene: shouts, sirens, boots pounding. Shonda stood in the middle, shouting legal statutes. You need a proper warrant. Section 1983. You're violating civil code, and then a voice from off camera. Get her out of the way. A hand shoved her. She stumbled, regained her footing, and shouted again. You don't get to silence the law. When the video ended, the room was silent again. Who was the suspect you were after? She asked. Daryl Hayes. My brother. Who lives there? Who was not the suspect listed on your warrant. You raided the wrong address. The prosecutor stood. Objection. We have no record. I filed a FOIA request. Exhibit B, she said, sliding a document forward. The warrant was for 7639S, Halstead. My brother lives at 7637. Whitaker's jaw clenched. He looked to the clerk again. The address matched. You violated a citizen's rights, she said, turning back to the officer. You assaulted me. You falsified an affidavit. You wrote that I obstructed when all I did was cite the law you broke. You think just because you're black and loud you get to... Objection, she said, her voice sharp. And I move for immediate dismissal of charges and recommendation of internal review against Officer Halverson. Whitaker stood abruptly, the courtroom gasping with a scrape of his chair. He looked down at Herat the hoodie, the boots, the calm, knowing fire in her eyes. What's your bar number? He asked. 312569, Illinois State Bar Association, she said. Graduated magna cum laude. Columbia Law. The judge said nothing. Then he sat, slowly. The story was no longer about a black woman arrested for obstruction. It was about a racist judge, a lazy system, and a woman who walked into the fire not to burn, but to light it up. Whitaker didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. In a courtroom, that silence felt like thunder. He looked down at his bench, not reading anything in particular, just avoiding her gaze, as if her presence alone was an indictment. You're a licensed attorney, he finally muttered, like it was a sin to say it out loud. Yes, Shonda answered, folding her hands behind her back. And you disguised yourself. What? The question came out bitter, accusatory. Shonda didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice didn't rise. It softened, like someone delivering a eulogy. Because in this system, black skin in a suit is still seen as a threat. But black skin in a hoodie? You'll listen. You'll expose yourself. The gallery stirred again. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some were astonished. Some amused. A few people, mostly black, smiled to themselves, like they'd just seen a secret weapon finally revealed. Whitaker cleared his throat, trying to reassert control. This courtroom is not a stage for social commentary. You intentionally deceived this court. No, she interrupted calmly. I exposed it. He slammed his gavel once. Enough. But the gavel sounded hollow now. The prosecution tried to recover. Your Honor, in light of these revelations, the state needs time to reassess its position. I move for continuance. Denied, Whitaker said, almost reflexively. We proceed. Shonda nodded and stepped back. Then I call my next witness. Miss Evelyn Carter. An older black woman stepped forward. She was petite, with silver braids pinned up neatly, and a face lined with wisdom. She walked slowly, but her posture was perfect. When she reached the stand, she raised her right hand with grace and took her seat. Please state your name and occupation. Evelyn Carter. I'm a civil rights historian and professor emerita at Howard University. What is your connection to this case? I witnessed the raid. I was on a video call with Shonda's brother when it happened. I heard everything. Did she interfere with officers? No. She was shouting legal codes, telling them they had the wrong address. They ignored her. Did she act violently? Never. She showed more restraint than I could have. Thank you, Professor. Shonda turned to Whitaker again. Permission to submit her sworn affidavit, transcript of call, and analysis confirming timestamp. He nodded stiffly, entered into evidence. The prosecution had no questions. It didn't matter they were drowning. By noon, Shonda had called 3 more witnesses, a retired police captain who confirmed the address mistake, a digital analyst who authenticated her video, and a civil rights lawyer who testified on patterns of racial profiling in the 3rd Precinct. Each one was calm, precise, devastating. Whitaker's once unshakable courtroom now felt brittle. The foundation deference, silence, hierarchy was cracking. Finally, he called for a recess. In the judge's chamber, Whitaker paced like a caged animal. Sweat dotted his brow despite the humming air conditioner. How the hell did we not vet her? He barked at the young prosecutor who had followed him in. She filed under a different name, Shauna Morgan. Her license is under Hayes. She knew the system. She played us. The prosecutor looked nervous. You mean admit we got ambushed by a black woman with brains? Silence. Whitaker stared out the window. The city looked calm, but he could feel something shifting beneath its skin. Today wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. When the recess ended, the gallery had filled. Word had gotten out. Lawyers, journalists, law students, they all want to see it. Back in session, Shonda stood once again. Your Honor, I have one final submission. Whitaker raised an eyebrow. Another surprise? No, sir, she said. Just context. She approached the bench and handed over a manila folder. He opened it and paused. Inside was a transcript from 10 years ago. His signature at the bottom. It was a sentencing record. Case: People versus Shonda M. Hayes. Charge: disorderly conduct, trespassing. Sentence: 90 days plus fine. He stared at it. I don't remember this. I do, she said. I was 19, protesting after a black teenager was shot by CPD. You were the judge. He looked up at her. You told me in open court that if I spent less time screaming about injustice and more time getting an education, maybe I'd make something of myself. A beat passed. Well, she said, eyes unwavering. I listened. You could hear the heartbeat of the room in that silence. Whitaker didn't speak for several seconds. His eyes were glassy. His mouth twitched, searching for the proper expression. Remorse, rage, redemption, but he found nothing. The court will recess until 3 p.m. for verdict, he said quietly, and slammed the gavel. When he stood to leave, he looked smaller than he had that morning. Not humbled, just exposed. As the room emptied, Shonda remained seated, looking straight ahead, her fingers curled together like a quiet prayer. A young law clerk approached her. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen, the girl whispered, eyes wide. You knew exactly how this would go, didn't you? No, Shonda said, but I knew it was time. Down in the basement cafeteria, reporters whispered theories. Phones buzzed with headlines half-written. On the 5th floor, 2 legal interns started printing copies of the transcript. The buzz was no longer contained. It had become a wildfire. At 2:57 p.m., Judge Whitaker returned. His robe looked heavier now. He took his seat, and spoke without preamble. This court finds a defendant, Ms. Shonda Hayes, not guilty on all counts. Charges are dismissed. Furthermore, I will be issuing an order for internal review of Officer Halverson's conduct and the department's execution of the warrant. He paused. Let the record show. This courtroom is not immune to bias. I was not immune. And today, that was made clear in the most public way possible. He looked directly at Shonda. I cannot change what I once believed, but I can be accountable for it now. Shonda gave a small nod. No gloating. No applause. Just truth exchanged. The gavel struck. The crowd didn't cheer, though they wanted to. Instead, everyone rose not for the judge, but for her. She walked out into the hallway, the doors parting for her like something sacred. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But she kept walking, silent, steady. At the base of the steps, a young black boy held out a crumpled notebook. Will you sign this? He asked. I want to be like you. Shonda took the notebook, flipped it open, and wrote, Don't be like me. Be louder. By the next morning, the headlines had taken over every news outlet in Chicago and then beyond. Black woman outwits racist judge in courtroom shocker. From defendant to defender. Shonda Hayes exposes systemic bias. Judge Whitaker faces calls to resign after humiliating trial reversal. The footage from the courtroom legally public domain had gone viral. TikTok users clipped Shonda's quiet, devastating takedown into sound bites. Just another black woman with a law degree and a memory was trending. Civil rights groups praised her. Law schools emailed invitations. And in neighborhoods like Bronzeville and Englewood, she became something more than a viral moment. She became hope. But Shonda didn't stay in the spotlight. After the trial, she refused interviews, declined book offers, turned down a Netflix documentary pitch. She returned to her two-room office in a brick building on 79th Street, between a shuttered bakery and a barbershop, and resumed her work. The people who walked in her office weren't media executives or politicians. They were tenants wrongfully evicted, teenagers accused of crimes they didn't commit, mothers fighting for custody, fathers trying to stay out of jail for unpaid parking fines. To them, she wasn't just a lawyer. She was a fortress. Still, the echoes of the courtroom hadn't faded. Judge Whitaker's conduct became the subject of a formal inquiry by the Illinois Judicial Review Board. Civil rights lawyers filed motions to revisit past cases where his bias may have influenced outcomes. Protesters began camping outside the Daily Center, holding up signs with his quotes, demanding his resignation. At first, Whitaker remained silent, but the pressure built, and eventually, the man who once ruled from behind mahogany and marble found himself in a very different room congressional hearing. He sat alone, not as a judge, but as a subject. Camera crews lined the back. Reporters scribbled furiously. A panel of legal scholars, civil rights advocates, and former federal judges questioned him for 6 hours. They showed transcripts of previous cases, compared his sentencing patterns by race, quoted his dismissals of defense motions by black attorneys versus white ones. When asked directly if he considered himself racist, he responded with a long pause. I didn't think I was, he said, but maybe that was the problem. It wasn't enough. 2 weeks later, under mounting pressure, Whitaker resigned from the bench. And that should have been the end. But real justice never fits neatly in headlines. On a Tuesday morning in late October, Shonda walked into the Westside Community Legal Aid Center to meet a client. The building was crumbling, the paint chipping like sunburnt skin, and the heating system clanked like an old radiator orchestra. Her client was already waiting. A woman in her early 50s, eyes rimmed red, clutching a manila envelope. I need help, the woman said. My son Darius is in jail. They're saying gang charges. But he wasn't even there. Shonda nodded. Do you have any paperwork? The woman handed her the envelope. Inside were court summons, police reports, and a single photograph of Darius 16, skinny, smiling in his ROTC uniform. Shonda scanned the documents. Her fingers stilled. She frowned. The judge on the case? Judge Ronald Whitaker. He was presiding over this? Shonda asked carefully. Yeah, right before he stepped down. Shonda flipped through the file. The dates matched. The case had been heard weeks before her own trial. Darius had been assigned a public defender who'd never met with him in private. He'd been sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention. I tried to appeal, the mother whispered, but they told me we missed the deadline. I don't know who to call. I saw your name online. Thought maybe someone finally cares. Shonda stared at the page. Her chest tightened. This wasn't a ghost from her past, it was a live wire. Whitaker's fingerprints were still on the system, still leaving bruises. I'll take the case, she said. The woman burst into tears. That week, Shonda filed a motion to reopen the case. Her brief was 23 pages long, filled with case law, due process violations, and data on judicial misconduct. She called it People versus Prejudice, a post-trial review. The prosecutor scoffed. Your Honor, this is a thinly veiled PR stunt. The new judging an older Latina woman with a razor-sharp, mind narrowed her eyes. I disagree. I've read Ms. Hayes' motion. This isn't theater. This is substance. Within days, the case was reopened. Shonda filed subpoenas, pulled transcripts, interviewed the public defender, and found a crucial detail. The key eyewitness against Darius had recanted 2 days before the sentencing. The statement had never been submitted into the record. She presented everything to the judge and waited. After a tense 30 minutes in chambers, the judge returned. Conviction vacated. Defendant to be released immediately. Darius was free. His mother collapsed in the gallery, sobbing. Outside the courtroom, Shonda stood beside the boy, her hand on his shoulder. He was shaking, not from fear but from disbelief. I thought I was going to die in there, he whispered. I thought nobody saw me. I saw you, she said. That's why I came. That moment quiet, undramatic, deeply human traveled further than any viral video. In the months that followed, more people came forward with stories. Cases under Whitaker's courtroom were reviewed. Some were reversed. Others were retried. Shonda found herself at the center of a storm, not one of chaos, but of rebuilding. She wasn't a hero. She refused that word. Heroes wear capes, she told a reporter once. I wear legal briefs and a tired face. But to the people she fought for, she was something rarer. She was justice with a name, a face, and skin that looked like theirs. Eventually, she was invited to speak at the University of Chicago Law School. The auditorium was packed. Professors, students, even former judges in the back rows. The dean introduced her with reverence, calling her a defender of integrity. Shonda stepped to the podium. No notes. I wasn't supposed to be here, she began. Not in this room. Not in this profession. Not even in this country, if some had their way. Laughter. Applause. But I'm not interested in belonging. I'm interested in accountability. Because it's not enough to name injustice, you have to disassemble it. She paused, scanning the crowd. We talk a lot about justice being blind. I think it's worse than that. Justice has eyes, but sometimes it chooses to look away. Silence. I'm here to make sure it doesn't. And with that, she stepped down. The standing ovation was immediate. Later that night, she walked alone through Jackson Park. The air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath her boots. Her phone buzzed texts from colleagues, messages from clients, even a voicemail from a senator's office. But she ignored them all. She stopped beneath a street lamp and looked up. Her reflection stared back at her from a puddle older than she remembered, tired in ways no amount of rest could fix. But behind the exhaustion, there was something else, something alive, a voice in her mind, not her own Judge Whitaker's, years ago. You'll never make anything of yourself shouting in the street. She smiled. Watch me. Spring came early to Chicago the next year. The city bloomed with a quiet resilience, as if it, too, had survived something brutal and was daring to soften again. In the heart of the South Side, just past a mural of Malcolm and Maya, painted on crumbling brick, a new sign appeared on an old law office door. Hayes Justice Initiative, Legal Defense, Civil Rights, Systemic Reform. Shonda stood beneath it that morning, holding the drill she'd used to hang it herself. No press, no ribbon cutting. Just her and the neighbors who'd watched the place transform from a dusty storefront to something alive. A movement in a building. Inside, desks lined the wall, each with mismatched chairs donated by churches and community centers. Law students from DePaul and Loyola filed in daily to volunteer. Retired attorneys offered pro bono hours. A former judge, one of the few who had openly criticized Whitaker before the scandal, gave free legal seminars in the back room every Thursday. But Shonda wasn't interested in building a monument. She was building a machine. Every week, her team filed appeals for inmates whose sentences had been handled by Whitaker. They launched civil suits against wrongful arrests. They created a public database of judicial misconduct updated weekly, searchable by name, county, and docket number. And more importantly, they taught. Teens from high schools across the South Side came in twice a week for Know Your Rights sessions. Shonda didn't sugarcoat anything. She showed them videos, made them read legal codes, challenged them like a professor. She reminded them that justice didn't start in courtrooms, it started in language. Knowing what they could say, knowing what to demand. One afternoon, a shy 15-year-old girl raised her hand. Miss Hayes, why didn't you become a judge? You're smarter than all of them. The class laughed. Shonda smiled. Because I don't want to sentence people, she said. I want to unsentence them. The answer didn't just land, it stuck. But even machines wear down. Shonda's body began to betray her first. Sleepless nights, constant migraines, a creeping pain in her jaw that turned out to be stress-induced nerve compression. Her doctor told her she needed rest, maybe 6 months off. Her therapist said she was living in a state of permanent fight or flight. She didn't argue, but she didn't stop either. Until one afternoon, the past walked through her front door. Judge Ronald Whitaker. He looked older than the last time they met. Not just tired, changed. His white hair had thinned, his eyes sunken in. He held his hat in his hands like it weighed more than guilt. Her staff froze. One intern dropped a cup. Shonda stood. Why are you here? She asked, voice cool but not cruel. I'm not here to ask forgiveness, he said, meeting her eyes. I know I don't deserve it. She didn't respond. He stepped forward. I saw what you've done. This place. These people. The cases you've overturned. I came to offer help. Help? She repeated, surprised. I've spent my entire life upholding a system I didn't understand was broken. I want to help dismantle it now. Quietly. Off the record. I know where the records are buried. Who signed what? Which prosecutors cut deals? I have everything. Her jaw tightened. And why now? Because I watch you walk into my courtroom and show me what law is supposed to look like. And because I've seen what happens when you pretend bias is just a word instead of a weapon. Silence filled the room. Shonda looked him over, the way one examines an old scar. Familiar, ugly, but no longer bleeding. She gestured to the empty chair across from her desk. Sit. Whitaker never made public statements, never wrote a memoir, never gave interviews. But inside the Hayes Justice Initiative, he became an unlikely ghostwriter. He drew maps of the back rooms of Chicago justice, taught young lawyers how to anticipate loopholes the way only someone who once exploited them could. His handwritten notes on procedural abuses filled 3 locked file cabinets. And still, Shonda never praised him publicly. When asked about him in interviews, she said, "I don't discuss people who once denied me humanity." She didn't hate him, but she would never absolve him. That was the line. 1 year later, on the anniversary of her courtroom victory, a small ceremony was held at City Hall. The mayor awarded Shonda the Freedom and Justice Medal, the city's highest civilian honor. She wore a black suit with silver trim and no makeup. Her acceptance speech was 3 minutes long. "I didn't get here because the system let me. I got here because it couldn't stop me. And I stand here today for every person it did stop. I can't free them all, but I will never stop trying." She didn't cry, but others did. After the ceremony, a girl approached Hareton, maybe 11, with cornrows and a too big backpack. She handed Shonda a drawing of a woman in a cape, holding a gavel like a sword. "Is that me?" Shonda asked gently. The girl nodded. "My mom says you made them hear us." Shonda kneeled, looking her in the eye. "Then you make them hear you next." 3 months later, Shonda finally took a break. She disappeared without announcement, leaving her team in charge. No calls, no texts, just a note on her desk that read, "Justice doesn't retire, but sometimes she takes the train." She spent a month in New Orleans, walking among jazz bands and old cemeteries. Then a week in Savannah, reading poetry in graveyards. Then 2 nights in Memphis, where she stood in front of the Lorraine Motel and wept quietly under gray skies. When she returned, she didn't speak of it, but something in her eyes had softened. The fight would go on, but she no longer had to be the only one carrying it. In time, the Hayes Justice Initiative opened 2 more branches, one in Baltimore, one in Atlanta. A documentary eventually was made, but Shonda had no part in it. It focused on the people she helped, not her. And somewhere, tucked in a quiet neighborhood in Bronzeville, she kept a small apartment above a record shop. No plaques on the wall, no newspaper clippings, just a shelf full of law books, a battered copy of The Fire Next Time, and a framed photo of her as a young protester, mouth open, eyes wide, cuffed hands raised high. A reminder, not of who she was, but of how far the law still had to go. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.